The Duke of Ashford stood at the altar, with his jaw clenched tight and his hands folded behind his back. His dark eyes stared straight ahead at the empty space where his bride should have been standing 5 minutes ago. The chapel was filled with the finest lords and ladies of England, all dressed in silks and jewels, all whispering behind their gloved hands. Everyone knew this marriage was nothing more than a business arrangement. Everyone knew the Duke did not want this union. Lady Eleanor Grey finally appeared at the entrance of the chapel. She wore a simple cream dress that looked plain compared to the expensive gowns worn by the guests. Her brown hair was pulled back in a modest style, without any of the elaborate curls that were fashionable. She carried no bouquet, and her hands trembled slightly as she walked down the aisle alone, because her father had refused to give her away. He said she was lucky anyone would take her at all. The Duke did not even look at her as she reached his side. He kept his eyes forward as the priest began the ceremony. Eleanor could feel the weight of every judgmental stare in the room. She heard the whispers clearly. Unfit. Plain. Unfortunate. That was what they called her. That was what he thought of her, too. 3 months earlier, the Duke had been forced into this arrangement by his dying father. The old Duke had made a promise to Lord Grey years ago that their children would marry and unite their lands. When the old Duke fell ill, he demanded his son honor that promise. The current Duke had argued and refused, but his father's final wish bound him like chains. Though he had no choice but to marry Eleanor Grey, a woman he considered beneath him in every way. Eleanor knew all of this. She had heard the Duke tell his friends at a garden party 2 weeks before the wedding. She had been walking in the rose garden when she heard his voice on the other side of the hedge. He was laughing with his companions about his misfortune. "She is unfit to be a duchess," he had said clearly. "She has no grace, no beauty, no conversation worth having. She reads books all day like a scholar and cares nothing for society. I would rather marry a servant girl with charm than that dull creature. But I am trapped by duty and honor." His friends had laughed and agreed with him. Eleanor had stood frozen on the other side of those roses, with tears streaming down her face. But she did not run away. She did not break the engagement. She had her own reasons for needing this marriage. Her father was drowning in gambling debts and had promised her to the Duke in exchange for money to save their estate. If she refused, her 3 younger sisters would have no home and no future. So Eleanor swallowed her pain and prepared to marry a man who despised her. Now they stood together as husband and wife. The priest pronounced them married. The Duke placed a cold kiss on her cheek that felt like ice. They walked back down the aisle together without speaking a single word. At the wedding breakfast, he sat as far from her as possible and drank glass after glass of wine while talking to everyone except his new bride. Eleanor sat quietly and barely touched her food. She watched her husband laugh with beautiful Lady Caroline, who had been his companion before this forced marriage. She saw the way he smiled at Lady Caroline, warm and genuine, so different from the cold mask he wore when he looked at Eleanor. Her heart felt like it was breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. That night, the Duke did not come to her chambers. Eleanor sat alone in the grand bedroom that was now hers, still wearing her wedding dress. The servants had prepared everything beautifully with candles and flowers, but there was no groom. She finally changed into her nightgown and climbed into the enormous bed alone. She cried into her pillow until sleep finally came. The next morning began her new life as the Duchess of Ashford. The Duke made it clear what he expected. She would manage the household, appear at his side for important social events, and otherwise stay out of his way. And he would live his life as he pleased. He had his own wing of the manor, and she had hers. They would be married in name only. Eleanor agreed to everything without argument. What choice did she have? She threw herself into her duties as Duchess. She learned everything about managing the vast Ashford estate. She met with the servants, organized the households, reviewed the accounts, and handled all the practical matters the Duke found boring. She discovered the estate was not as wealthy as it appeared. There were debts and problems everywhere that had been ignored for years. She also discovered something else. In the library of Ashford Manor, she found ledgers and papers that showed the Duke's father had made some terrible business decisions before he died. The estate was losing money every month. If things continued this way, the Duke would lose everything within 2 years. But no one had told him. His steward was old and confused, and had hidden the problems rather than face the Duke's anger. Eleanor spent weeks studying the accounts in secret. She had always been good with numbers and logic. Her father had mocked her for it, saying such skills were wasted on a woman. But now those skills revealed the truth. She could see exactly what needed to be done to save the estate. Lands needed to be sold. Investments needed to be changed. Expenses needed to be cut. She made careful notes and plans. But she said nothing to the Duke. Why should she help the man who called her unfit? Why should she save the fortune of someone who treated her like she was invisible? She told herself she did not care if he lost everything. She told herself he deserved his fate. Yet every day, she saw him differently than he saw himself. She watched him ride across the estate in the mornings, strong and capable. She saw him speak kindly to the servants when he thought no one was watching. She heard him laugh with genuine joy when he played with his sister's children. She noticed he gave generously to the poor families on his land, even though he could not afford it. Beneath his cold exterior was a good man trapped by his own pride and pain. Eleanor realized something that terrified her. She was falling in love with her husband, the husband who would never love her back. 6 months passed, and the distance between Eleanor and the Duke remained as wide as an ocean. He still barely spoke to her, except when necessary. He still spent his evenings with his friends and Lady Caroline. He still treated Eleanor like she was a piece of furniture in his grand home. But Eleanor had changed in ways he did not notice. She had transformed Ashford Manor into something remarkable. The servants adored her because she treated them with kindness and respect. She remembered their names and asked about their families. When the cook's daughter fell ill, Eleanor personally paid for the doctor and sat with the child through the night. When the stablemaster injured his leg, she made sure he received full wages while he recovered. The staff would have done anything for their new duchess. The local villagers also began to love her. Eleanor visited the sick and the elderly. She organized a school for the children who had nowhere to learn. She used her own small allowance to buy books and supplies. She taught reading lessons herself every Wednesday afternoon. The villagers, who had whispered about the plain new duchess, now praised her constantly. They said she had a heart of pure gold. But the Duke noticed none of this. He was too busy trying to maintain his lifestyle, while his fortune crumbled around him. He bought expensive horses he could not afford. He hosted lavish parties to impress his friends. He gave Lady Caroline expensive gifts of jewelry and silk. He refused to see that his money was running out like sand through his fingers. Eleanor watched it all with growing concern. Her love for him had deepened, even though he gave her nothing in return. She saw him growing worried and stressed. She saw lines appearing on his handsome face. She heard him pacing his study late at night, when he thought everyone was asleep. She knew the weight of the failing estate was crushing him, but his pride would not let him ask for help or even admit there was a problem. Then one night, everything changed. Eleanor was in the library reading by candlelight when she heard a crash from the Duke's study. She rushed to see what happened and found him sitting on the floor surrounded by papers. His head was in his hands and his shoulders were shaking. He was crying. She had never seen him show any emotion except cold indifference or polite charm. This broken man on the floor was someone completely different. Eleanor's heart clenched with pain for him. She quietly stepped into the room and knelt beside him on the floor. "Your Grace," she said softly. "What has happened?" He looked up at her with red eyes full of anguish. For a moment she thought he would order her to leave. But instead, words poured out of him like a dam breaking. He told her everything. The debts, the failing investments, the loans coming due. He told her his steward had finally confessed the truth tonight. The estate was nearly bankrupt. Everything his family had built for generations was about to be lost. He would be ruined. "I have failed everyone," he said with his voice breaking. "My father, my family name, all the people who depend on this estate. I am a failure." Eleanor listened to everything without speaking. When he finally fell silent, she made a decision that would change both their lives. She stood up and walked to her own chambers. She returned with the ledgers and plans she had been working on for months. She spread them out on his desk and lit more candles so he could see clearly. "You have not failed," she said firmly, "and you will not lose Ashford. Look at these numbers." The Duke stood up slowly and came to the desk. He looked at her papers with confusion, turning to shock. She had documented every problem in perfect detail. More than that, she had created solutions. She showed him which lands to sell and which to keep. She showed him investments that would bring steady income. She showed him how to cut expenses without harming the people who worked for him. She had thought of everything. "How did you do this?" he asked in amazement. "How did you even know about any of this?" "I pay attention," Eleanor said quietly. "I have been managing the household accounts for months. I saw the problems, and I looked deeper. I spent every evening studying your family's business records. I consulted with bankers in town using a false name, so no one would know the estate was in trouble. I created a plan that will save everything if you follow it exactly." The Duke stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. This woman he had called unfit and dull had just handed him salvation. She had worked in secret for months to save him, even though he had treated her with nothing but coldness. He did not understand. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you help me after the way I have treated you?" Eleanor met his eyes steadily. She could have lied. She could have said it was duty or obligation. But she was tired of hiding the truth. "Because despite everything, I have come to care deeply for you," she said, with her voice shaking only slightly. "I know you do not feel the same. I know I am not the wife you wanted. But I could not stand by and watch you lose everything when I had the power to help." Silence filled the room like a heavy blanket. The Duke continued staring at her, with something shifting in his dark eyes. Shame, Eleanor realized. He was feeling shame. "I heard you," she continued, because now that she had started, she needed to say everything. 3 weeks before our wedding, in the rose garden, I heard you tell your friends I was unfit to be your wife. I heard you say you would rather marry a servant with charm. I heard every cruel word. But I married you anyway, because my family needed me to. And then I fell in love with you anyway, because I saw the good man beneath your pride. So yes, I helped you, not because you deserved it, but because I could not help myself." Tears streamed down her face now, but she did not look away from him. She had said the truth, and she would not take it back. Let him mock her if he wanted. Let him throw her confession back in her face. At least she would have been honest. But the Duke did not mock her. Instead, he sank into his chair, like all the strength had left his body. He covered his face with his hands. "What have I done?" he whispered. "Dear God, what have I done to you?" He looked up at her with agony written across his features. "You heard me say those terrible things, and you still married me. You watched me ignore you and humiliate you for months. You saw me give attention and gifts to another woman, while I treated my own wife like she was nothing. And through all of that, you worked to save me. Eleanor, I have been so blind and so cruel." Eleanor did not know what to say. She had expected many reactions, but not this raw regret. The Duke stood and took a step toward her, then another. He stopped right in front of her, and slowly, carefully, he took her hands in his. His touch was warm, so different from the cold kiss he had given her at their wedding. "I have been a fool," he said quietly. "I thought I knew what made a woman worthy. I thought it was beauty and charm and social graces. I was angry about being forced to marry, and I took that anger out on you. I never gave you a chance. I never looked at who you truly were, and you are extraordinary." Eleanor's heart was beating so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Was this real? Was he truly saying these things? "Can you ever forgive me?" the Duke asked. "Can we possibly start again?" Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw genuine remorse there. She saw a man who had finally woken up to his own mistakes. But she also knew that words were easy and actions were what mattered. "I can forgive you," she said slowly. "But forgiveness is not the same as trust. You broke my heart, Your Grace. You cannot mend it with one conversation." He nodded and held her hands tighter. "Then let me earn it back. Let me prove I can be the husband you deserve. Please, Eleanor, give me that chance." Part 3. Eleanor wanted to believe him. Every part of her heart wanted to throw herself into his arms and say yes to everything. But she had learned to protect herself during these long months of loneliness. She had built walls around her heart to survive his coldness. Those walls could not come down in a single night, no matter how sincere his words sounded. "Actions speak louder than words," she said softly, before pulling her hands gently from his grasp. "Show me through your choices, not your promises." She left him standing in his study and returned to her chambers. That night, she lay awake wondering if anything would truly change, or if this was just a moment of gratitude that would fade when morning came. But morning brought something unexpected. Eleanor woke to find a beautiful bouquet of wildflowers on her breakfast tray. Not expensive hothouse roses, like the ones he used to send Lady Caroline, but simple flowers from the fields around Ashford. Tucked among them was a note in his own handwriting. "These reminded me of you. Unpretentious, natural, and more beautiful than anything cultivated in a greenhouse. Forgive my blindness." Eleanor touched the petals with trembling fingers. It was a small gesture, but it was a beginning. The Duke began implementing her financial plans immediately. He met with her every morning to discuss the estate business. At first, their conversations were formal and careful, but slowly something shifted between them. He started asking her opinion on everything, not just finances, but decisions about the tenants, the farms, the household. He listened to her ideas with genuine respect and often told her she was brilliant. More importantly, he changed how he lived. He stopped hosting expensive parties. He sold his racing horses except for 2 favorites. And one afternoon, Eleanor watched from her window as Lady Caroline's carriage arrived at the manor. The Duke met her outside and had a long conversation. Eleanor could not hear the words, but she saw Lady Caroline's face turn red with anger. She saw the Duke shake his head firmly. Then Lady Caroline climbed back into her carriage and left Ashford forever. That evening, the Duke came to Eleanor's sitting room. He had never visited her private chambers before. He stood in the doorway, looking uncertain, like a nervous boy instead of a powerful duke. "I ended my friendship with Lady Caroline," he said simply. "It was not appropriate for a married man to maintain such a connection. I should have done it the day we wed. I am sorry I did not." Eleanor set down her book and looked at him. "You did not have to do that for me." "Yes, I did," he said firmly. "You are my wife. You deserve my complete loyalty and respect. I want to give you those things, Eleanor. if you will let me." Over the following weeks, the Duke courted his own wife like she was a precious treasure he had nearly lost. He brought her tea while she worked on the accounts. He asked about her school for the village children, and then donated money to buy more books. He sat with her in the library during the evenings, and they read together in comfortable silence. He made her laugh with stories from his childhood. He asked about her dreams, and actually listened to her answers. Eleanor felt her walls crumbling piece by piece. She saw that his change was real and lasting. He was becoming the man she had always believed he could be. But she was still afraid to fully open her heart again. The pain of his rejection had cut too deep. Then came the day that changed everything forever. Eleanor had been feeling ill for over a week. She was tired and nauseous, especially in the mornings. The doctor came to examine her, and afterward he smiled broadly as he delivered his news. She was carrying the Duke's child. Eleanor sat in stunned silence after the doctor left. They had only been together as husband and wife one time, on the night after their conversation in his study when he had come to her chambers and asked permission to stay. She had said yes because her heart had wanted him despite her fear. It had been tender and gentle, and nothing like she expected. And now, there was a baby growing inside her. She did not know how to tell him. What if this changed things between them? What if he only stayed with her now, out of obligation to their child? She wanted him to choose her for herself, not because she carried his heir. But that evening at dinner, the Duke noticed she was not drinking wine. He noticed she looked pale. He insisted on knowing what was wrong, and Eleanor found she could not lie to him. She told him the truth. The Duke stood up from the table so fast his chair fell backward. Eleanor's heart sank. He was upset. He did not want this. But then he crossed to her side and dropped to his knees beside her chair. He took her hands and pressed them to his lips, with tears streaming down his face. "Eleanor," he breathed. "My dearest Eleanor, you have given me everything. You saved my estate. You made my house a home. You taught me what it means to truly value someone. And now you are giving me a child. I do not deserve you, but I swear I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you." He looked up at her with such raw emotion that her last walls finally shattered completely. She touched his face with gentle fingers, wiping away his tears. "I love you," she whispered. "I have loved you for so long." "I love you too," he said fiercely. "I was too blind and proud to see it before, but I have been falling in love with you for months now. Everything about you amazes me. Your kindness, your intelligence, your strength, your generous heart. You are not unfit to be my wife, Eleanor. I was unfit to be your husband, but you made me better. You made me into a man who could be worthy of your love." He stood and pulled her gently into his arms. He kissed her with all the passion and tenderness he had never shown before. Eleanor kissed him back, pouring all her love into that moment. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. The months that followed were the happiest of Eleanor's life. The Duke never left her side through her pregnancy. He read to her when she was tired. He held her hand through every moment of discomfort. He told her she was beautiful, even when she felt enormous and awkward. He talked to her growing belly and told their child how lucky they were to have such an extraordinary mother. The financial plans Eleanor created worked perfectly. Within a year, Ashford Estate was thriving again. The Duke credited his wife publicly for saving their fortune. He made sure everyone knew that the Duchess was not just a figurehead, but the brilliant mind behind their success. Society matrons who had once mocked plain Eleanor Gray now competed for her attention and advice. But Eleanor cared nothing for society's approval anymore. She had everything she needed in the walls of Ashford Manor. She had the school she built for village children, and she had the servants who loved her like family. She had the respect of the tenants and villagers. Most of all, she had her husband's complete devotion and a baby on the way. When their daughter was born on a spring morning, the Duke held the tiny girl in his arms and wept with joy. He named her Grace, saying she was born from the grace his wife had shown him when he deserved none. That evening, as Eleanor recovered in bed with baby Grace, sleeping in a cradle beside her, the Duke sat on the edge of the bed and took his wife's hand. "Do you remember what I said before we married?" he asked quietly. "That you were unfit to be my wife?" Eleanor nodded, though the memory no longer held any pain. "I was so wrong," he said, kissing her hand softly. "You were never unfit for me, my love. I was unfit for you. But you loved me anyway. And you saved me anyway. You gave me everything anyway. And now to know the truth. You were not just fit to be my wife. You were everything I ever needed. You always were. I was just too foolish to see it." Eleanor smiled and touched his face with love shining in her eyes. "We found our way to each other, in the end. That is all that matters." The Duke leaned down and kissed her forehead, then her lips, pouring all his love and gratitude into that gentle touch. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the Ashford estate that they had saved together. Inside this room was everything that mattered: a husband and wife who had found real love, a baby daughter who represented their future, and a happiness that had been hard-won but was now unshakable. The Duke of Ashford had once thought his wife was unfit. Now he knew the truth. She was perfect. She always had been. And he would spend the rest of his life showing her just how much he loved and treasured her. Their story began with coldness and rejection, but it ended with a love deeper than either of them had ever imagined possible. And that love would last for all their days.